Rear Admiral Oh Seung-ho had never faced odds like this before. His battle group of 25 ships was approaching the Meridian Junction, where intelligence reported a hive fleet of 78 vessels waiting in ambush. By every rule of military strategy, he should have called for reinforcements and waited for better odds. Instead, he gave the order to attack. "All ships, this is Admiral Oh," he broadcast to his fleet. "Today we show the galaxy something they've never seen before. Today we prove that humans don't need fair fights to win battles." The hive fleet was positioned perfectly to destroy any approaching force. Their biomechanical ships formed overlapping fields of fire, with nowhere for an enemy to hide. Their tactical computers had calculated every possible approach and prepared countermeasures for each one. They had not calculated for an enemy that would charge straight through the center of their Formation O's flagship, the Thunderstrike, led the charge with all weapons blazing. The neural link technology allowed his crew to operate as a single organism, anticipating each other's actions and responding to threats before they fully materialized. The ship moved like a living thing, dodging hive fire while returning devastating volleys of its own. "Sir, hive vessels are attempting to form a containment grid," reported his tactical officer. "Lieutenant Shin Hyun-sik, let them try." Oh replied calmly. "All ships execute maneuver Delta 7. What happened next defied every principle of space combat the galaxy understood. The human ships split up and began attacking in seemingly random patterns, each vessel operating independently while somehow maintaining perfect coordination. The hive formation, designed to counter organized fleet tactics, couldn't adapt to what looked like chaos but was actually a new form of warfare. Captain Lee Ji-woo watched her Marines prepare for the most dangerous mission in military history. They were going to board a live hive command ship and fight their way to the central processor. It was suicide, but the intelligence they could gather might save millions of lives. "Remember your training," she told her assault team as they loaded into boarding pods. "The hive thinks psychological warfare is their greatest weapon. Show them what happens when they face an enemy that has spent 3 centuries being told they're not good enough." The boarding pods launched from the cruiser Relentless, cutting through space toward the massive hive vessel. Each pod carried 10 Marines in powered armor that could function in any environment. But more importantly, each Marine wore neural dampeners that made them immune to hive mental attacks. The pods punched through the hive ship's hull, and the Marines poured out, weapons blazing. The interior was a nightmare of organic machinery and converted prisoners, but the humans pressed forward without hesitation. They had seen worse things during their long isolation: the despair of being rejected by an entire galaxy, the pain of watching civilizations die while being forbidden to help. Compared to that, physical horror was nothing. Captain Lee's team fought through corridors lined with processing pods containing half-converted aliens. The sight would have broken the minds of most species, but humans had learned to compartmentalize horror and keep fighting. They reached the command center after losing 6 Marines to hive defenders. "Sir, we're inside their network," reported Sergeant Park Tae-young, connecting his equipment to the hive processor. "Downloading everything we can get. The information they recovered would revolutionize the war effort." The hive wasn't just a military force. It was a collective organism that relied on constant communication between its parts. Disrupt that communication, and the entire system would collapse. Dr. Cho Yasil's new battle doctrine was spreading through the human fleet like wildfire. The Seoul Doctrine emphasized 3 principles: overwhelming force, rapid deployment, and absolute commitment to victory. Where other species fought to minimize casualties, humans fought to achieve results. The difference was becoming apparent across every theater of operation. At the Battle of Kelleran's Reach, human forces had accepted terrible losses to prevent the hive from establishing a forward base. At the Siege of Vorthak Prime, human ships had deliberately rammed hive vessels when their weapons ran out of ammunition. The galaxy was learning that humans didn't just fight wars, they embraced them completely. Every engagement became a test of will between humanity's determination and the hive's hunger. Admiral Kwon Ji-ho was coordinating the largest space battle in galactic history. The Battle of Koltan's Gate would determine whether the hive could reach the core worlds or be stopped at the outer rim. Intelligence estimated that losing here would mean the death of 50 billion innocent civilians. The human fleet was outnumbered 10 to 1, but Ji-ho had learned something important during his long career. Numbers mattered less than determination. The Hive had superior firepower and tactical coordination, but they had never faced an enemy that simply refused to lose. "Sir, Hive forces are moving to envelop our left flank," reported Captain Nam Suman from the Starfire Reborn. "Let them come," Jiho replied. "All ships prepare for ramming speed. If we can't outgun them, we'll show them what human stubbornness looks like." What followed became known as the Miracle of Koltan's Gate. Human ships, their weapons exhausted and their hulls breached, turned themselves into guided missiles. Crews evacuated to escape pods while their vessels, now operating on automatic systems, rammed into Hive command ships at tremendous speed. The sight of humans literally throwing their ships at the enemy broke something in the Hive collective consciousness. For the first time in their species' history, they encountered prey that fought back with such ferocity that victory became more costly than retreat. Ambassador Ryu Hyunsu watched the battle from his diplomatic vessel, broadcasting live footage to every council world. His commentary was simple and direct. "This is what courage looks like. This is what happens when people decide that some things are worth dying for." The images of human sacrifice spread across the galaxy faster than any official news report. On 1,000 worlds, alien civilians watched humans giving their lives to protect people they had never met. The contrast with their own government's inaction was impossible to ignore. On the core world of Nexus Prime, riots broke out as citizens demanded their government join the human coalition. On the industrial planet of Pharos, workers went on strike until their leaders agreed to provide supplies to human forces. Even on the council homeworld itself, protesters gathered outside government buildings carrying signs that read, "Humanity shows us the way." The political earthquake that followed would reshape galactic civilization. But first, the war had to be won. Commander Bei Jinho was leading the ground assault on Thraxis, the Hive's largest processing center. His forces had been fighting for 3 days straight, pushing through biomechanical horrors that defied description. The enemy had thrown everything at them: converted prisoners, living weapons, environmental hazards designed to break human morale. None of it worked. Human soldiers had been trained for this their entire lives, not just in tactics and weapons, but in the mental discipline required to keep fighting when victory seemed impossible. They had learned that lesson during 3 centuries of rejection and isolation. "Sir, we've reached the central processing facility," reported Major Kim Min-sok, his voice tired but determined. Through the smoke and wreckage, Bei could see the massive structure where millions of beings were being converted into Hive drones. The sight should have been overwhelming, but instead it filled him with cold fury. This was why humanity had broken their chains. This was why young men and women were dying light years from home. "All teams, move in," he ordered. "We end this here." The battle for the processing facility took 12 hours. When it was over, Bei's forces had saved over 2 million prisoners and dealt the Hive their first major defeat on the ground. The cost was terrible. Half his Marines were dead or wounded, but the victory was absolute. As medics evacuated the wounded and engineers began dismantling Hive equipment, Bei received a message from Admiral Jiho. The Battle of Koltan's Gate was over. The Hive advance had been stopped. For the first time in years, the galaxy had hope. President Kim Tae-wan stood before the emergency assembly of the Galactic Council. But this time he wasn't asking for permission or pleading for acceptance. He was dictating terms to a galaxy that had finally learned to listen. "The human fleet has broken the Hive advance," he announced to the stunned assembly. "Our forces have liberated 17 worlds and saved over 50 million civilians. We have proven that the enemy you thought was unstoppable can be defeated." He paused, looking around the chamber at the alien leaders who had spent 3 centuries dismissing his people as barbarians. "Now you must decide what happens next. You can continue to cling to your old prejudices and face the Hive alone, or you can join us in finishing what we started." The silence stretched for a long moment. Then Councillor Thakara of the Vorthak Republic stood up. "President Tae-wan," she said formally, "the Vorthak Republic requests permission to join the human coalition." One by one, other councillors rose to make the same request. Within an hour, 18 species had formally petitioned to join humanity's war effort. The quarantine that had lasted 3 centuries was not lifted by treaty or negotiation. President Kim Tae-wan's emergency broadcast reached every human settlement at exactly the same moment. From the mining colonies of the asteroid belt to the research stations orbiting Jupiter, From the generation ships traveling between stars to the secret outposts hidden in distant nebulae, humanity heard their leaders call. For 300 years, we have been told we are too dangerous for civilized space, Taiwan said, his voice steady and strong. Today we prove them right. Not because we seek to harm the innocent, but because we refuse to let evil triumph while good people do nothing. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Every human ship, station, and settlement began mobilizing for war. Factory workers became soldiers, scientists became weapons designers, farmers became supply officers. In a matter of hours, humanity transformed from a quarantined species into a military force unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Admiral Quan Jiho stood on the command deck of the Indomitable, watching as his secret fleet assembled. For 3 centuries, humanity had pretended to be weak and isolated. In reality, they had been preparing for this day. Hidden shipyards throughout the Sol system had been building a war fleet in secret. Disguised as mining operations and research stations, "Sir, all battle groups are reporting ready," announced Captain Li Jiwoo, his tactical officer. She was young but brilliant, one of the new generation of officers trained specifically for this moment. Jiho nodded as he watched the display showing hundreds of ships forming up in perfect formations. Battleships that could punch through any defense, carriers packed with fighter squadrons, destroyers designed for speed and stealth, and support vessels loaded with weapons the galaxy had never imagined. "Signal all ships," Jiho commanded. "Today we end humanity's isolation. Today we show the galaxy what we're truly capable of." Dr. Park Minji had been working for 18 hours straight, but she wasn't tired. The excitement of finally being able to use her research kept her energized. Her laboratory had been transformed into a weapons development center, where humanity's best scientists were creating tools of war. The neural link technology was her greatest achievement. Human brains were naturally chaotic, making connections in ways that alien minds couldn't predict. By linking crews together through quantum processors, human ships could think and react faster than any enemy. What looked like disorder to aliens was actually humanity's greatest strength. "Doctor, the first batch of neural interfaces is ready for installation," reported her assistant, Dr. Yoon Cheong. The young scientist had been working on biological weapons designed specifically to disrupt Hive collective consciousness. "Excellent," Minji replied, checking the test results. "How are the anti-Hive countermeasures coming along?" "Better than expected. It turns out that human emotional volatility is exactly what we need to create cognitive chaos in their networks. What the Council saw as a weakness is actually our secret weapon." Captain Nam Suman felt the quantum drive engage as her strike force jumped toward the Meridian Junction. The sensation was like nothing else in the universe, as if reality itself was bending around them. She looked around the bridge of her new flagship, the Starfire Reborn, and felt pride in her crew. These weren't just soldiers following orders. They were volunteers who had chosen to risk everything to save people they had never met. Engineers who had given up comfortable jobs to maintain weapons systems. Pilots who had left their families behind to fly into almost certain death. This was what humanity looked like when they finally stopped pretending to be civilized. "Captain, we're detecting Council ships moving to intercept," reported her navigation officer. Lieutenant Kim Min-seok-suman smiled grimly. "Let them come. It's time they learned what happens when you try to cage something that was born to be free." The Council fleet that moved to stop humanity's breakout was led by Admiral Zorthak of the Hegemony. He commanded 50 ships and had orders to force the humans back into their quarantine zone. As his fleet approached the human formation, he expected to see the small collection of outdated patrol boats that Council intelligence had reported. Instead, he found himself facing a wall of ships that belonged in nightmares. Human technology had advanced far beyond what anyone thought possible. Their vessels moved like living things, responding to threats before they fully materialized. Their weapons fired beams of pure energy that could cut through any armor. "Admiral, the humans are hailing us," reported his communications officer. "Put them through," Zorthak ordered. Captain Nam Suman's image appeared on the screen. She looked calm and determined, not at all like someone facing overwhelming odds. "Council fleet, this is Captain Nam Suman of the Earth Defense Force. We have no quarrel with you. Stand aside and let us pass." "Impossible," Zorthak replied. "You are in violation of the Galactic Quarantine Treaty. Return to your territory immediately or face the consequences." "The consequences?" Suman's voice was cold as space itself. "Admiral, We are going to fight an enemy that has destroyed 15 star systems while your council debates protocol. We are going to save people you have abandoned. We are going to do the job you refuse to do. If you want to stop us, you'll have to destroy us. Is that really the choice you want to make? For a long moment, there was silence on both fleets. Then one of Zorthak's ships, the cruiser Harmonious Purpose, broke formation and moved toward the human fleet. "Admiral," came a voice over the fleet communications. "This is Captain Kelthera of the Harmonious Purpose. I cannot in good conscience fire on people trying to save innocent lives. I formally request permission to join the human fleet." Before Zorthak could respond, 2 more ships followed suit. Then 5 more. Within minutes, half his fleet had defected to join humanity's crusade. General Yang Hyunju watched the coordination displays in amazement. Across the galaxy, human forces were emerging from hiding places no one had suspected existed. Deep space monitoring stations revealed themselves to be forward operating bases. Asteroid mining platforms transformed into weapons depots. Even some of the failed colony ships that had supposedly been lost in accidents were now broadcasting their positions and requesting orders. "General, we're receiving reports from 18 sectors," announced Major Kim Hyunwoo. "Human sleeper agents embedded in Council territory are activating and providing real-time intelligence on hive movements." Yang nodded as she studied the tactical situation. For 3 centuries, humanity had been building a network of spies, sympathizers, and hidden resources throughout Council space. What the galaxy had seen as isolation had actually been infiltration on a massive scale. "What's our total force strength?" she asked. "Still calculating, but preliminary numbers show over 800 ships of the line, plus support vessels and auxiliary craft. And that's just the first wave. Production facilities are coming online that could double that number within 6 months." Yang allowed herself a small smile. "I think it's time to show the galaxy what humanity has learned about warfare." Commander Bei Jinho was leading the first human ground forces to make planetfall outside Sol system. His target was the besieged world of Kalos, where hive forces were processing the population for conversion. His Marines wore armor powered by fusion reactors and carried weapons that could level buildings. But more importantly, they carried something no other species possessed: absolute determination to save every life they could. Human soldiers didn't retreat when faced with overwhelming odds. They didn't surrender when their position became hopeless. They fought until victory or death, because that was what their species had learned to do during 3 centuries of being told they weren't good enough. "All squads, remember your training," Bei broadcast to his forces as they prepared for orbital insertion. "The hive thinks fear is a weapon. Show them what happens when they face an enemy that chose to be afraid and fight anyway." As the human fleet spread across the galaxy like a tide of steel and fire, President Kim Tae-won received reports from every theater of operations. The galaxy was finally seeing humanity as they truly were. Not the primitive barbarians the Council had described, but a species that had spent 300 years preparing for this exact moment. "Sir, we are receiving communications from 17 different species requesting assistance," reported his aide, Secretary Park Jin-hwan. "The Council's authority is collapsing as member worlds realize that humanity is actually trying to help them." Tae-hwan looked out at the stars from his office window. Somewhere out there, human forces were engaging the hive in battles that would determine the fate of the galaxy. Young men and women who had never been allowed to set foot on an alien world were now dying to protect alien lives. "Send a message to all human forces," he said quietly. "Tell them that the galaxy is watching. Tell them that everything we've worked for, everything we've sacrificed, everything we've endured, has led to this moment. Tell them to make it count." As if responding to his words, reports began flooding in of human victories across multiple sectors. The Meridian Junction was secure. Kalos was being liberated. Hive forces that had seemed unstoppable were suddenly facing an enemy they couldn't understand or defeat. For the first time in galactic history, the hive swarms were retreating, and everyone knew who was responsible for making them afraid. General Yang Hyunju had been tracking the hive swarms for weeks, and the numbers were getting worse every day. From her command center deep beneath the Swiss Alps, she coordinated humanity's intelligence networks across the galaxy. The picture they painted was terrifying. The hive moved like nothing anyone had ever seen before. They didn't just conquer worlds. They consumed them completely. Every living thing, every resource, every piece of technology was absorbed into their growing mass. What was worse, they were learning from everything they took. General, we're receiving new data from our deep space monitors, reported Major Kim Hyunwoo. He was one of her best analysts, calm under pressure and brilliant at seeing patterns others missed. Yang studied the holographic display that showed the hive's latest movements. The industrial worlds of the Kalaran Empire were under attack. These weren't peaceful colonies like the Viren territories. The Kalarans were warriors with powerful fleets and advanced weapons. If the hive could take them, they could take anyone. How long do the Kalarans have? Yang asked. At current rate of advance, maybe 2 weeks, Hyunwoo replied. But General, there's something else. The hive is changing its tactics. Look at this. The display showed footage from the battle for Kalaran Prime. Yang watched in horror as captured Kalaran soldiers were dragged into the hive ships. When they emerged, they were different. Their bodies had been altered with mechanical parts, and they fought alongside the hive with all their original skill, but none of their original mercy. They're turning prisoners into weapons, Yang whispered. Dr. Cho Yisul arrived at the command center carrying a thick folder of papers. She was humanity's best military strategist, a quiet woman who could see the shape of entire wars in her mind. Her face was pale as she set down her analysis. I've run the numbers 17 different ways, Cho said. The result is always the same. The hive is growing exponentially. Every world they take makes them stronger, and they're taking worlds faster than anyone can stop them. Yang looked at the projections. How long do we have? 2 years until they reach the core worlds. Maybe less if they keep learning from the species they capture. Cho pointed to a chart showing Council military strength. The combined fleets of all Council members couldn't stop what's coming. They're fighting the last war while the hive is already fighting the next one. Commander Bae Jinho had volunteered for the most dangerous mission in human history. His team of Special Forces soldiers was heading to Altara Prime, a world currently under siege by the hive. Their job was to gather intelligence about hive tactics and technology. It was almost certainly a suicide mission. The stealth ship Ghost slipped through the hive blockade like a shadow. Bae and his team used experimental cloaking technology that barely worked and would only last a few hours. They had to get in, gather what they needed, and get out before the cloak failed. Altara Prime had been a beautiful world, famous for its crystal cities and floating gardens. Now it was a nightmare. The hive had landed massive biomechanical structures that were literally eating the planet's surface. Rivers of molten metal flowed from processing plants where entire forests were being converted into raw materials. But the worst sight was the people. The Alterans who had been captured were being changed. Their bodies merged with hive technology to create new types of soldiers. Bae watched through his scope as former civilians were transformed into living weapons, their minds wiped clean and replaced with hive programming. My God, whispered Sergeant Oh Minho. They're not just killing them, they're stealing everything they were. Bae's team managed to infiltrate a hive command center and download crucial data about their hierarchy and communication systems. But the mission cost them half their people. As they escaped, Bae looked back at the dying world and made a promise to the soldiers who didn't make it. Out, the galaxy will know what happened here, he said. Ambassador Ryu Hyunsoo stood before the Galactic Council for what he knew would be the last time. In his hands, he carried evidence of everything humanity had learned about the hive threat. Brain scans, tactical analyses, and most importantly, proof that humans were immune to hive assimilation. The council chamber was nearly empty. Half the member species were too busy fleeing the hive advance to attend meetings. The other half were arguing about whose fault the crisis was and who should pay for fixing it. Honored council members, Ryu began. I come before you today with information that could save the galaxy. My people have discovered that human neural architecture makes us immune to hive conversion technology. We can fight them where others cannot. Councillor Thakera of the Vorthak Republic interrupted him. The humans have been quarantined for good reason. We cannot simply ignore 3 centuries of precedent because of a temporary crisis. Temporary? Ryu couldn't keep the anger out of his voice. 15 systems have been completely destroyed. Billions are dead. How is this temporary? The hive will eventually be contained through proper diplomatic channels, insisted Councillor Vrex of the Meridian Collective. We do not need the assistance of a violent, unpredictable species. Ryu looked around the chamber at the empty seats and the frightened faces of the remaining councillors. These people were going to let the galaxy burn rather than admit they might have been wrong about humanity. I have shown you the evidence, Ryu said quietly. I have offered you our help. I have begged you to see reason. You have chosen to ignore all of it." He activated a small device on his wrist. "Since you will not listen to our offers of friendship, perhaps you will hear our cry of desperation." The device was a quantum transmitter that sent an encrypted signal across all human space. Every colony, every outpost, every ship received the same message simultaneously. It was just 2 words, but they changed everything. "Prometheus begins." Ryu walked out of the council chamber as alarms began blaring. The quarantine sensors around Sol system were detecting massive energy signatures. The human fleet, which the council believed was just a few dozen outdated patrol ships, was powering up systems that shouldn't have existed. On Earth, President Kim Tae-hwan addressed his people from the steps of the rebuilt United Nations building. His words were broadcast to every human settlement in the galaxy. "My fellow humans, the galaxy burns while politicians debate. Civilizations die while bureaucrats argue about jurisdiction. We have tried to be good neighbors, good citizens, good friends. But sometimes being good means being willing to break the rules." He paused, looking directly into the camera. "Today we break the biggest rule of all. Today we leave our cage. Not because we want to conquer or destroy, but because we refuse to watch innocent people die when we have the power to save them." In shipyards hidden throughout the asteroid belt, massive construction platforms came online. Ships that had been disguised as mining equipment revealed their true nature as humanity's secret fleet prepared for war. Admiral Kwon Ji-ho stood on the bridge of the battleship Indomitable, watching as 3 centuries of preparation finally bore fruit. "All ships, this is Admiral Ji-ho," he broadcast to the growing fleet. "Today we show the galaxy what humanity is truly capable of. We don't fight for conquest or glory. We fight because someone has to, and no one else will." Dr. Park Min-ji worked frantically in her laboratory, putting the finishing touches on weapon systems the galaxy had never imagined. Human research, unconstrained by council limitations, had produced technologies that seemed almost magical. Quantum displacement drives that could move ships faster than light itself. Neural link systems that allowed human crews to think and act as one. And most importantly, bioweapons specifically designed to disrupt Hive collective consciousness. As the first human battle groups prepared to leave Sol system, Captain Nam Soo-min received her new orders. She was no longer the captain of a cargo ship who had broken the rules to save some refugees. She was now the commander of a strike force that would spearhead humanity's entrance into galactic warfare. "All ships, prepare for quantum jump," she announced to her fleet. "Remember, we're not just fighting for Earth anymore. We're fighting for everyone the Council has failed to protect." The jump coordinates were set for the Meridian Junction, where the Hive was preparing to attack the core worlds. It would be humanity's first real battle against an enemy that had conquered half the galaxy. As the ships vanished into quantum space, Soo-min spoke the words that would become legend. "Galaxy, ready or not, here we come." Admiral Kwon Ji-ho stood on the bridge of the Earth defense ship Horizon, staring at the empty space where alien ships should have been. For 300 years, humanity had been locked away from the galaxy like criminals in a cage. The Galactic Council had decided long ago that humans were too dangerous, too violent, too unpredictable to join civilized space. Ji-ho had spent his entire career trying to prove them wrong. He had sent countless messages to alien governments offering trade, friendship, and cooperation. The response was always the same: silence. Sometimes they would get a brief reply telling them to stay in their corner of the galaxy and not bother anyone else. The bridge crew worked quietly around him. These were good people, dedicated to protecting Earth and its colonies, but Ji-ho could see the frustration in their eyes. They all knew they were capable of so much more than sitting on the edge of known space, watching and waiting for nothing. "Sir, we're receiving another transmission from the Centauri colony," reported Lieutenant Park Min-ji from the communications station. She was young, brilliant, and like everyone else on the ship, tired of being ignored by the galaxy. "Put it through," Ji-ho said. The holographic display showed Governor Chen of the Centauri colony. His face was grim. "Admiral, we've detected strange energy signatures moving through the outer systems. Our long-range sensors are picking up something massive heading toward the Viran territories." Ji-ho frowned. The Virans were one of the few species that had ever shown any kindness to humanity. They had secretly traded medical supplies and scientific data, always careful to avoid council attention. "What kind of energy signatures?" "Unknown, sir. But they're big and they're moving fast. Whatever they are, they're not showing up on any of our databases. After the transmission ended, Jiho walked to the science station where Dr. Park Minji was analyzing the data. She had transferred from communications to science after completing her doctorate in xenobiology. Like many humans, she had studied alien life forms they had never been allowed to meet. "What do you think, Doctor?" Jiho asked. Minji pulled up a three-dimensional map of the galaxy. Red dots marked the unknown energy signatures. "These movement patterns don't match any known species. They're too organized to be pirates, too aggressive to be traders. And look at this." She highlighted several systems. "These used to be inhabited. Now they're showing no life signs at all." Jiho felt a cold chill. "You think something is destroying entire worlds?" "I think something is eating them, sir." Across the galaxy, Li Dongyan crouched in the shadows of a council monitoring station. He had been working undercover for 5 years, pretending to be a maintenance worker while gathering intelligence for Earth. It was dangerous work, but someone had to keep an eye on the aliens who kept humanity locked away. Today, he had finally found something important. The council was receiving distress calls from across their territory, but instead of sending help, they were arguing about jurisdiction and protocols. Dongyan watched in horror as entire star systems went dark, while the council debated which committee should handle the crisis. The worst part was the footage from the Viran colonies. Dongyan had learned to speak Viran during his time undercover, and he could understand their desperate pleas for help. Families were being separated as unknown attackers consumed everything in their path. Children were crying for parents who would never come home. Dongyan activated his secret transmitter and sent an encrypted message to Earth. "They're all going to die, and the council is doing nothing." Captain Nam Suman was loading supplies onto her ship when she received Donghyun's message. The Starfire was officially a cargo vessel, but Suman had made some unofficial modifications that made it one of the fastest ships in human space. She had been planning a routine supply run to the Mars colonies, but the message changed everything. "Change of plans," she told her crew. "We're going to help the Virans." Her first officer, Commander Bei Jinho, looked concerned. "Captain, that means breaking the quarantine. The council will consider it an act of war." "Let them," Suman replied. "We can't just sit here while innocent people die." The Starfire reached the Viran system just as the attackers arrived. Suman had never seen anything like them. The alien ships looked like they were made of living metal, constantly shifting and changing shape. They moved like a swarm of insects, coordinating their attacks with perfect precision. The Viran defense fleet was brave but outmatched. Their ships were designed for exploration and trade, not warfare. Suman watched as one after another was destroyed or captured. Strange tendrils extended from the attacking ships, pulling Viran vessels inside like a predator swallowing its prey. "All Viran ships, this is Captain Nam Suman of the Earth vessel Starfire," she broadcast. "We're here to help. Follow us to safety." For a moment there was only silence. Then the Viran commander responded, his voice filled with desperate hope. "Earth ship, we thought your people were forbidden from leaving your territory. Today we choose to break that rule," Suman said. "Load your people onto the fastest ships you have. We'll cover your retreat." The rescue operation took 6 hours. Suman's crew worked tirelessly to coordinate the evacuation, while the Starfire used its advanced weapons to hold off the attackers. They managed to save 30,000 Viran civilians, loading them onto refugee ships that would take them to hidden colonies far from the invasion. As they prepared to leave, the Viran commander sent a final message. "Earthship, we will never forget what you have done today. You have shown us what true courage looks like." 3 days later, Suman received an official communication from the Galactic Council. She was ordered to report for immediate arrest and trial for violating the quarantine. The charges included illegal border crossing, interference with council affairs, and endangering galactic peace. She forwarded the message to Earth Command with a simple note. "Mission accomplished. 30,000 lives saved. Worth it." President Kim Tae-hwan read the reports in his office overlooking the rebuilt Seoul. The Viran homeworld had fallen completely. 2 billion people were dead or missing. The attackers, now identified as something called the Hive Swarms, were spreading across council territory like a plague. And still, the council's only response was to condemn humanity for trying to help. Tae-hwan called an emergency session of the United Earth Assembly. Representatives from every human colony and settlement attended via hologram. For the first time in 3 centuries, humanity needed to speak with one voice. "My fellow humans," Taiwan began, "we have spent 300 years trying to join a galaxy that wants nothing to do with us. We have offered our friendship, our knowledge, and our help. We have been patient, respectful, and peaceful. And what has it gotten us?" He gestured to the reports on his desk. "It has gotten us a front-row seat to watch civilizations die while bureaucrats debate. It has shown us that the galaxy values its politics more than its people. It has proven that sometimes the most civilized thing you can do is be willing to break the rules." The assembly hall was silent as Taiwan continued. "The galaxy has made its choice. They would rather let billions die than accept our help. But we have a choice too. We can continue to sit quietly in our corner, or we can do what we know is right regardless of what anyone else thinks." He paused, looking out at the faces of humanity's leaders. "If the galaxy will not hear our offers of friendship, perhaps they will hear our cry of desperation. Perhaps it's time they learned what happens when you force peaceful people to become warriors." The vote was unanimous. The silence in the Valerian conference room stretched for long minutes. Admiral Kethmar stared at the tactical display showing his surrounded fleet. 200 of the Empire's finest warships, trapped by an enemy they thought they had already defeated. His clawed hands trembled as the reality of the situation sank in. "You want my surrender?" he said slowly. "The surrender of the entire Third Fleet." "Not just your fleet," Deho replied calmly. "The surrender of all Valerian forces in human space. Complete withdrawal from our territories. Reparations for the damage you've caused. And a promise that this aggression will never happen again." Around the room, Valerian officers shifted nervously. Some muttered among themselves in their hissing language. Others stared at the humans with something approaching fear. These 3 small beings had just demonstrated that everything the Empire believed about warfare was wrong. So Min watched the aliens with new understanding. For 3 years, she had seen them as unstoppable conquerors, giant reptiles with advanced technology and overwhelming numbers. But now she could see the truth. They were bullies who had never faced real resistance. "The Valerian Empire has conquered 47 species," Kethmar said, trying to salvage some dignity. "We have never surrendered to anyone." 47 species that couldn't fight back effectively, Taehyun observed. Species that followed normal military doctrine. Species that surrendered when defeat became mathematically certain. "You've never fought humans before." The security officer moved to stand beside one of the tactical displays. With casual efficiency, he began pointing out the flaws in the Valerian battle formation. "No mobile reserves. No contingency plans. All your ships clustered together like targets in a shooting gallery. You fight like you've never faced an intelligent opponent." Admiral Kethmar's pride burned, but he couldn't argue with the results. His perfect battle formation had become a perfect trap. The humans had maneuvered him exactly where they wanted him without firing a single shot. "How long have you been planning this?" he asked. "Planning? We weren't planning anything," Deho replied. "We were hoping you would be reasonable, that you would accept negotiated boundaries or limited trade agreements. But we've learned to prepare for the worst-case scenario." Since the Long Dark, So Min added, finally understanding her own people's history. "Every human military officer studies the ancient campaigns, not just as history but as current tactical doctrine. We've been preparing for this exact situation for 2,000 years. The ambassador nodded approvingly at his aide. "Ms. Park is correct. The Long Dark taught us that sometimes you face an enemy who cannot be reasoned with, an enemy who sees compromise as weakness and mercy as invitation for more attacks. The Devourers were such an enemy. And you defeated them," Kethmar said quietly. "We didn't just defeat them," Taehyun corrected. "We erased them. Completely, every ship, every base, every trace of their civilization. When humans decide that an enemy is too dangerous to exist, we are very thorough." The implications hung in the air like a threat. The Valerians had seen the images of dead Devourer machines floating in space, an entire galactic empire, reduced to scrap metal by a species that refused to surrender. "But that's not what we want here," Deho said quickly. "The Devourers gave us no choice. They couldn't be negotiated with or reasoned with. You can be. The question is whether you will be." Kethmar's communication officer approached hesitantly. "Sir, message from the home fleet. They're ordering immediate withdrawal from human space. The Emperor himself has signed the order." "The Emperor?" Kethmar's voice was barely a whisper. "Word of today's events has reached the capital. Daeho explained. Your emperor is wiser than his field commanders. He understands that some fights aren't worth winning. So Min pulled up a report on her tablet. According to our intelligence services, 17 allied species have already begun withdrawing from human territory. The Crystalline Collective has offered to mediate peace negotiations. Even the Zephyrian War Council is calling for immediate ceasefire. They're abandoning the Empire? An officer asked in disbelief. They're being pragmatic, Taehyun replied. News travels fast in the galaxy. By now, every military intelligence service knows that humanity just turned complete defeat into total victory in under 3 hours. That kind of tactical flexibility makes us very dangerous enemies. Admiral Kethmar slumped in his chair. His career was over. His fleet was trapped. His empire had abandoned him. And all because he had underestimated a species that looked physically weak and technologically inferior. What happens to us? He asked. To my crews? That depends on you, Daeho replied. Surrender now, withdraw peacefully, and your people go home. Continue fighting and we'll demonstrate why the Devourers are extinct. The choice was simple, but Kethmar's pride made it difficult. He had never surrendered to anyone. The very concept was alien to his warrior culture, but the alternative was the complete destruction of his fleet and the probable end of his species' military power. If I surrender, he said slowly, what guarantee do I have that you won't pursue us? That you won't invade our territory in return? Daeho considered the question seriously. You have our word. But more than that, you have our nature. Humans don't conquer for the sake of conquest. We fight to protect our people. Once our people are safe, we have no reason to continue fighting. Rule number 1, So-min said quietly. We never leave our people behind. But we also don't pursue enemies who are no longer a threat. Taehyun nodded. The Devourers were different. They couldn't stop consuming and expanding. They were a permanent threat to all life in the galaxy. You're just soldiers following orders. End the threat and we have no quarrel with you. The Admiral looked around the room one more time. His officers waited for his decision. Outside, 200 of the Empire's finest ships hung helpless in space, surrounded by an enemy they had thought they understood. Computer, Kethmar said in a defeated voice. Prepare formal surrender documents. Full withdrawal from human space. All Valerian forces to return to Empire territory immediately. Sir, his communication officer said. What about the reparations? The compensation for damages? Admiral Kethmar looked at Daeho, who smiled sadly. Standard galactic law applies. Financial compensation for destroyed property, medical support for wounded civilians, and a formal apology to the families of the dead. Acceptable, the Admiral said quietly. As the surrender documents were prepared, So-min found herself studying the Valerian officers. They looked defeated but not broken, humiliated but not destroyed. The humans had given them a way out that preserved their lives and their dignity. Ambassador, she said quietly, why are we being so generous? They killed thousands of our people. Because, Ms. Park, the goal was never revenge. The goal was protecting our people and ensuring this never happens again. Dead enemies can't learn from their mistakes. Live enemies can spread the word about what happens when you threaten human civilians. Taehyun checked his watch. Civilian evacuation complete. All transports have reached safe distance. The immediate threat to our people is over, which means rule number 1 has been satisfied, Daeho concluded. Our people are safe. The war is over. An hour later, the Valerian fleet began its withdrawal from human space. Ship by ship, they powered down their weapons and turned toward home. Admiral Kethmar's surrender had been broadcast throughout the galaxy, along with recordings of the battle that never happened. As the last Valerian ship disappeared into hyperspace, So-min stood beside her mentor on the bridge of the Harmony's edge. What happens now? She asked. Now we go home, Daeho replied. We rebuild what was damaged. We remember the people we lost. And we prepare for the next time someone decides to test our resolve. Will there be a next time? Taehyun answered from his position at the sensor station. Eventually. There always is. But it won't be the Valerians. And word of today will spread. It might be decades before anyone else tries. Long enough for our children to grow up in peace, So-min said hopefully. That's all we can ask for, Daeho agreed. Peace for our children. Everything else is just details. As their ship turned toward Earth, So-min reflected on everything she had learned. Diplomacy wasn't just about negotiation and compromise. Sometimes it was about demonstrating that some lines could never be crossed. Sometimes the best way to preserve peace was to show your enemies exactly what war with humans really meant. Behind them, the galaxy began to spread a new story. A story about a species that looked weak but fought like demons when their children were threatened. A species that would rather die than surrender when civilians needed protection. A species that had once fought gods and won. The story spread from system to system, from species to species, until every corner of the galaxy knew the most important lesson of all. Rule number 1 wasn't just a human saying, it was a promise.